your name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so we're going to introduce ourselves. Some of you probably recognize us, but maybe you don't really know us. We're Ron and Dana Robinson. I'm the children's ministry director here. That's why most of you see me or up in praise team. And
I've been involved in numerous capacities here. I just finished my 6th year on the board, and now I am going to do a lot more of this stuff, I guess. I've been asked to help do devotions and teach and those sort of things. So we love being involved here at Emmanuel, and so you've probably seen us around.
We wanted to let you know a little bit about our marriage, since that's what we're here to talk about. So we met at Luther College the first weekend of our freshman year in college, and we've been together ever since. So that's 26 years ago. So we were together all through college, got married in August after we graduated, moved to Portland, Oregon 2 weeks after that, and that's where Ron was in chiropractic school, and that's also where our oldest daughter was born. So we just kind of went right through everything. College, marriage, chiropractic school, and having a baby away from our family.
So as we were talking about all this, we looked at this, and we didn't go through the typical stages where a lot of people do. We didn't go through the spring, summer, fall. We kind of went into the fall, winter, spring, and explored all the seasons, maybe a different order. The thing that Dana didn't tell you is that we met our first weekend of college, but it's because this guy was too hard to resist. I walked into the wrong classroom, and so I'll paint the picture of that. I grew up in a super small town in northwest Iowa, and where if you had math class, look at where I was supposed to go, I just went with them. And there was actually a girl from my high school in the class, and Dana and her knew each other, and she introduced us. But anyway, just a funny story of how we met, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, but after chiropractic school, we moved back to Iowa. That's where we're originally from, and both started our businesses at the age of 26. So we just went through a lot in a few years, but you're going to hear a lot about that as we go through today, just like the challenges. Last week you talked about summer and the contentment and the happiness of summer, but that it's work, right? And we're going to talk a lot about that again today. But first of all, do you have any follow-up comments or questions about last week, about summer? Anything that was mentioned? I did go back and watch it. I'm usually not, I was in praise team last week, so I was not in here, but I did go back and watch it. Anything stand out to anyone? Anyone feel like you're in summer right now? Dawn is.
Did you raise your hand? So what makes you feel like you're in summer? Like, yeah, what emotions make you feel?
I'm kind of a newlywed,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I just adore him, so.
Because it's the only answer I can give without getting in trouble. Actually, so the thing that Dave said last week that I thought was, it takes one person to make decisions within the marriage to take you into fall. You can do fall or winter, right? It takes both of you continuously to be in spring and summer.
Yeah, that's actually a quote we put, I think, on the back of your bulletin.
It's a powerful point.
I don't have a bulletin in
Yeah,
my
there's
hand
your
right
bulletin.
now. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the actions too. But it takes both spouses to move a marriage from fall to spring, but it takes only one to move from fall to winter. The way we think and the actions we take make all the difference. So that's in any of the seasons, right? It takes work, and that's what we were saying with everything we went through in just like the first 4 years of our marriage. It just took work, right? It takes being very intentional, and we'll get to the pointers on that later. But the one thing I did see, what did I say the quote was that he had up on the screen? It was
the purpose of marriage is not to be happy, but to glorify God.
Yeah, that's the one that was the takeaway I took. That's what I liked. All right.
And so that's what we'll talk about in this whole process, is how do we create and keep God at the foundation of our marriages as we enter the season of fall. So a little review. Basically, marriages, in anything in life, we're always in a state of transition. I talk about this in my business. I talk about it in life. we're either moving one direction or the other. We're not stagnant. We don't stay still. When we think that we're staying still, that's when problems can arise. So we're continually moving from one season to another. And so there are obviously 4 seasons. Spring, as you look at that, there's openness, there's hope, there's anticipation. This is the newness, right? And this is, we all get excited about the season that comes after what we're in right now. It's because it's continual, it's new, it's fresh, it's all of that stuff. And then you get to the summer stage, we become comfortable, right? You think about lounging in the sun and maybe sitting by the pool, whatever it is. That's kind of where we are in our marriages too. We get to that comfort stage, right? The newness wears off, we're comfortable. But with that comfortability, there becomes uncertainty because we can become too comfortable, we become complacent. And that's where fall comes in, where there's uncertainty. Maybe there's negligence, maybe there's apprehension, we're not sure where we're going. And then you get into winter, there's discouraged, detached, and dissatisfied.
Yeah, you were talking about with being comfortable in summer. There was that thing going around on Instagram where men think of Rome all the time. Do you guys think of Rome all the time? No. Anyway, the point is that the fall of Rome, though, came because of them getting too comfortable. They were just drinking and having fun all the time, right? And they weren't putting in the hard work anymore. But that just made me think.
Yeah, I think that's true with again, with any relationship, especially with marriage. We get comfortable, and sometimes we take for granted what we have, and sometimes the communication falls to the wayside. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today is kind of how we can work on those sort of things and the intentionality that goes into this season of marriage. So the thing to keep in mind is that every season has challenges. Even though there might be good times, there are also sometimes difficult times. But we can use those difficult times to create even stronger bonds and better momentum and a stronger connection to one another and to God.
You can go to the next. Oh, yeah, and the key is to develop skills. Have a toolbox for your marriage. Yeah. All right, so who likes fall? Anyone like fall?
Right, if you were to ask somebody what their favorite season is, how often do you get someone to say winter? Not very often, sometimes, but most often people will say, oh, I love summer. Well, like we talked about, summer is that comfortable stage. It's easiest, right? And then people love fall. Why do they love fall? Why does everybody, raise your hand, why do you guys love fall?
It's not hot.
It's not hot. What else?
It's pretty.
Change of
Pretty, change of colors. Yeah.
Crisp, cool air.
Right? So that's the same thing when we look at marriage. People think of fall as beauty. There's like, oh my gosh, you guys have such a great relationship. Your marriage is so wonderful. Things look wonderful on the outside, right? And Dana's going to read a little passage about what that might look like and how we might take that for granted.
Yeah, so it was, did they read the book or no? Okay.
Maybe, but we did not.
Okay, all right. So it talks about going to North Carolina for the leaves, right? You go to North Carolina for the beautiful leaves, and then I'll carry on from there. What we do not talk about, but know without a doubt, is that this display of color is temporary. Soon the chilling winds will rip the vibrant canvas apart and the leaves will fall to the ground, leaving the trees bare. One interesting phenomenon is that the leaves do not fall on the same day, but over a period of 4 to 6 weeks, the beauty fades and the forest is left unclothed. No one drives to the mountains to see a naked tree. The falling of the leaves is an apt analogy of what happens in the fall season of a marriage. In early fall, the marriage looks fine externally. Outsiders may even comment on how happy the couple seems to be. But inside the marriage, things are changing. And when the chilling winds arrive, the deterioration of the marriage will be obvious to all.
I think it's super important to take a look at all of these seasons, but in particular, like fall, we're not going to dwell on the negative aspect of things, but to recognize that there are potentials for things to go into that season of winter, and that to understand that these are normal experiences. Every couple goes through all of these things. Every marriage experiences all of this. And so I think the thing we want to dive into a little bit today is being aware. Like, how do we recognize these things? Can we move forward with these things? And how can we strengthen our relationship, not just to one another, but to God, to glorify this gift of marriage? And so this is what we want to talk about, is like, how can we overcome some of these challenges that we experience in fall? And so fall, like we talked about, it's a prelude to winter. It looks great on the outside, and people, like Dana said, may comment on how happy things look. Anybody been in that situation? You've had comments where you're like, oh my gosh, you guys are so great. You're so happy. Anybody experience that?
But then on the inside,
But on the inside, sometimes maybe you're not feeling that? Yeah. Yeah. What are some things that make you feel that way on the inside? Maybe they're not as good as they think. But so I know when Dan and I were talking about this is why we said we went from like the newlywed stage directly into the fall, because we got married and in 2 weeks we moved and I started chiropractic school. And Mike and I were actually talking about this in the very beginning. It's like I had this network of people. I had this built-in community. Dana didn't. She was an outsider, had no job, no social network, nothing whatsoever. But I had all of these built-in colleagues and coworkers, if you will. And so that created this tension. But where we found the deepest connection is we immediately, what was the first thing we did?
We found a church.
We found a church. And that was probably the greatest gift that we could have been given, is we found that church that created that bond together. We had that common unity there, even though we had different things going on in our lives.
Yeah, and what we were talking about when we were sitting there was, because we had a coffee date yesterday morning, that's how we did all this. It's usually the busyness, either with what you were doing or once you have little kids, you're always digging into what the kids are doing, or you're just independently doing your thing, right? And we'll do that. We both own businesses, so we both just put our head down and go do what we need to do independently, and we forget sometimes to connect about that.
Right, and so like I said, it's like two ships passing in the night. People will often say like, can you talk to Dan about it? I'm like, yeah, when we see each other this weekend. And they're like, it's Monday. I'm like, I know. That's the way our lives have become, is we've got kids, we've got businesses, we've got so many other things. So this is why it's important to recognize some of these feelings, some of these experiences, so we can take the time to really make sure that we stay connected as we do that. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that was similar with winter, or between winter and fall, it was mentioned during winter one, which was Missy's presentation, was the fact that you move into this mechanistic mode where you're just going through the motions to get things done. Mm-hmm. So was the question that you had for the floor, was it that what are outside?
Yeah, so what are some outside things?
I think it has the question.
Circumstances? Yeah, well, this is your time to dive into fall. And
Okay. Yeah.
the two shifts, yeah, what are some of the things?
What are some signs that you and your spouse could be disengaging? What are things that happen in your marriage that you notice?
Frustration over silly little things.
Give an example.
I forgot to take the trash out last night, like I'm supposed to every night. Have them right there for you.
Usually getting in trouble for not actually listening.
What do you mean?
And I'll usually give myself away by asking a question that reveals that I wasn't listening. It would have been better if I just did my mouth shut.
I think earlier on, when our kids were younger or not quite born yet, he coaches. And so, especially in spring, like Reagan was born in April, he coaches track, indoor and outdoor. And then like when Maya was born, I'm like, I have 3 kids. This guy is gone all the time. And it's hard not to be like a little resentful and just be like, I'm just going to do it all myself. And like, he's putting all his energy into something else and all of his time. But you know, we figured it out. He still coaches track.
And for those not involved in track can be one of the most consuming sports on the planet. It's crazy because it's so unpredictable. The timing of things takes long. It's not like you have 60 minutes on a clock, right? You've got events and it takes as long as it takes, and you've got weather and you've got all these things, and so you don't know, right? And so that it becomes consuming.
Andrew, did you pay Ron for that answer?
Well, we experienced it. So our oldest, so those of you that don't know, our oldest runs cross country and track in college, and we kind of were getting on her a little bit about not having a job, and she's like, I can't get a job, and I'm like, yes, you can. You have time, and it's like, no, she can't. She runs cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track, so there's no off season. So we can appreciate what a spouse would go through for a track coach for sure. Yeah.
Another thing that I guess isn't between the two of us, but I just feel on the inside is if I start playing the comparison game of what others have and stuff like that, then that brings about discontentment and then.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting thing, right? So as we look at fall is beautiful because what we see, right? So we see all this stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean we feel all this stuff, right?
It's like Instagram.
Right, and so that's one of the biggest places where we can get frustrated, disengaged, angry even, right, is when you see other things and you think that, wait a minute, am I the only one that's going through this? Why am I going through this and not others? And this is, it's definitely a challenging time.
Yeah. So how do we avoid playing the comparison game?
It's a great question. I don't know. You tell me. I think honestly, I look at this, again, not just speaking of marriage, but I think it's for a lot of things in life is you just have to understand what your truth and understanding and what you want and your vision for where you're going in life is.
Yeah, we talk about this in, sorry, I didn't mean to
You
cut
go
you off.
ahead.
We talk about this a lot in Momco and Mops too. Like, if you need to take yourself off of Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is, take yourself off of that. If that is something you can't stop looking at and comparing yourself, then take it off your phone. You know, just take those temptations away.
I mean, this is an interesting thing, Don. As you look at marriage, I don't know the actual stats, but I mean, I would say over 50% end in divorce, right? And so if we look for kind of validation of what everything else is going on in our life, we got to understand that the foundation of our Christian faith is probably not there like it might look like, right? So we have to understand what is the foundation of marriage. And like I said in the beginning, it's to glorify God. And most people aren't doing that. It's to be happy and to show what is going good in life. But deep in, they're miserable.
Yeah,
And
they don't
that's-
bring you joy anymore, then just get rid of them.
Right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what Instagram and that's what
Yeah.
the world tells you. So understanding what it is that is your true happiness, your true joy, and I think we find that in the connection to God and the gift of marriage through God.
I should move on to the emotions. So as
Yeah.
you've noticed, probably the pattern, so that we have the emotions, the attitudes, and the actions of every season. So we're going to talk about the emotions of fall.
Go ahead.
All right, what do you think are some of the common emotions of fall? So the book says fear, sadness, dejection, and apprehension. You can click.
So,
Okay.
yeah, no, I think, and then there's discouragement, resentment, feeling of being unappreciated. So like you said, there's almost resentment, right? The question I think I want to know more than anything is like, why would some of these things come up? That's the understanding that we have to have, is not just like recognizing them, but really seeing how some of these things of fear might show up in your marriage. And it doesn't necessarily have to be fear. Like, everybody responds a little bit differently to situations. So some people are stressed, they become fearful, they become angry, they become sad, they become feeling like they're lonely. Those are some of the things. So what might be some examples of that in your marriage that would bring up some of these emotions? I know one that I was discussing with Mike earlier is when we moved back to Iowa after chiropractic school, and it might not seem like that, but I'm not really a people person. I love being around people in my job, and I get to do that in my job. But when I'm done with my job, I want to be alone. And so we moved to this new town. We didn't know anybody. And so I come home and Dana's like, oh my gosh, I just met this amazing couple at the church. We should go out for dinner with them. And I'm like, no, I don't want to, right? And so that created some dejection, right? And some apprehension and those sort of things. And so that's a normal thing. And so like, this is where we go back to the stage in life where there might be some loneliness, there's independence. Those are the things that are happening. It's like as you start your career, right? Maybe you get back into work if you've had kids. Those are some of the kind of experiences that would lead to some of these things. Anything else that you guys can experience?
I feel like the kids can definitely have an impact on that. Like, all you need is one meltdown after a long day of school, and it's just downhill for the rest of the night.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you focus your attention on all that, right? And then the other thing, too, is if you have one that stays home with them or is with them more than the other, and then the other one comes home, and you have no idea what they've been going through, and so there's just like two separate lives being lived. So how can we kind of remedy that? That's what we have to look at.
So one of the things is the list there's so many more that can be added to it. How do you currently manage these types of emotions? So if you get dejection or something happens that's a trigger, I know for me personally, it's an anger outburst, right? And that's not helpful. So then the question I always wrestle with is then how do I hit the reset button? How do I get back to where I was? Because I didn't handle that emotion of fall well. And so what do people do when you have one of these triggers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like for us,
communication is key. And
The thing that's interesting is that I respond differently. I get very bitter when things aren't going my way. Dana gets extremely frustrated and sadness, right? And so those things are important to recognize in one another these emotions as well. And how do you make sure you're attentive to it? And how do you get through it? Anybody want to share any examples of what they might do if this has happened to yourself? No.
A lot of times, it's something like you were saying about something with the kids. It's just a little trigger, and it gets into, we're in a car ride, for instance, going to Micah's basketball game or something, and all of a sudden, here we are, the adults in the front seat, and it's getting into a full-blown argument on parenting techniques that we've been struggling with for 14 years, because I parent different than she does. So I guess feeling appreciated and feeling validated on both sides, where one doesn't think they have the upper hand because they're with the kids more than I am when I'm working full-time and she's part-time, so that's type of stuff. So I would say feeling validated and almost being on pins and needles, any little thing will set you off. Sure. And it's frustrating. But the good thing about us is we've always been able to fully bring it back. So by the time it's nighttime and evening, we're hugging and kissing, and we've made up. So we don't let it linger more than a couple hours.
that's really, really good. So I want to speak on what you said for just a minute, because
I think it's important to understand that these emotions and these outbursts are usually just symptoms. They're not to the root cause of what's going on, right? And so that's the important thing, is to understand what is really happening because of these, right? And so it goes back to that connection, right? I think at the end of the day, when we look at any of these emotions, we feel like we're not in this together. We feel like we're separate. And so how do you stay connected? And that's important. So what specific things do you do to remedy that, to make sure that you are in it together?
I feel like we both fundamentally know that we're in it together. Obviously, we've got Christ as our back, so cornerstone. We basically have vowed that we're not going to, when we were dating, whenever we have arguments, we're not going to let it linger and simmer and get even more of a mountain out of something. So I guess we just have that mutual understanding that when the kids are in bed, then we'll talk about it again. And then we calm down, right? We try to say we're sorry. Sometimes, sometimes only one of us will say sorry at that time. But we've deliberately had an agreement that we're not going to let it.
And that agreement falls, like you said, on the backbone and the center, the cornerstone of Christ and in your faith, right? So I think that's also
Important to understand is that our children are gifts of God. This is our responsibility to care for them, and understand that we are here to do that together. Like, that is a gift of God that we've been blessed with. It's not always easy to recognize that. It's hard a lot of times.
Thing,
yeah, right.
I could have taught this slide for you.
Okay, tell us all about it.
But what I was going to say, in all seriousness, when we do have these periods of, Carl's really good at sending devotions on marriage. Way better than me. Like prayer for your marriage. You probably don't even realize how important that is. Because we are very, very stubborn. We can go after each other. Yeah. And it comes back to what I said a couple weeks ago when I was in here, coming back to Christ and the selfishness that we all have as sinners, but recognizing that we need it for us, bringing it back to the Lord and why we're even here.
Yeah.
So
I
that's important.
think that's the point we were trying to save that for the end, which that's silly. But anyway, it's all about connecting to Christ, right? Like whatever, either you pray together, but also praying for one another. Even when you're mad, it says pray for your enemies, right? Well, at that moment, maybe he feels like your enemy. But you have to pray for your spouse, and it really softens your heart for them. Yeah.
So I guess just a few practical things that I feel like are important for us is, I mean, as soon as you feel that disconnectedness, just to try to address it, not let it linger, so kind of lean into it. And then we actually tried to name it, so like power struggle is probably the biggest thing that we have, is we both have a certain idea for how something should go, and then we end up getting into a power struggle over it. So like naming it and making it like this third thing that's separate from us makes it less personal, so then we can like sit down and talk about it. So,
Yeah, take a deeper dive into like what's really going on, because we're really not angry about that stupid
Right.
little
Right, yeah, and like I was saying,
Getting
a lot of
angry.
times these emotions are a symptom of something else. It's not that, it's just what,
Boils over, right? Yeah.
Because two of the things we've just talked about have happened with us. We have one child in particular that we will not name, but
You'll
is-
probably know.
they probably don't actually, but it's one of the girls because I can't not say she. But anyway, she if she's well, it took us a long time to figure out why she would melt down. Like she would melt down and it would change the whole atmosphere of the whole house. Like it wasn't just her. We'd get angry with each other. The other two kids were suddenly yelling, and it like she's like a hurricane, like
Yeah, it's a lot.
It stirs up the whole house. But it took us just figuring out half the time it was because she was hungry. Like, give her a snack and she's gonna be okay. It's like if you just get down to the bottom of what their issue is sometimes, like that was, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing about the coaching, we have a harder time when I'm very involved, like in the musical. He gets a little bitter when I'm here a
little.
lot for the musical. So
A lot.
So like that we have to make sure we stay connected.
Yeah, and at the end of it, it's not that she's doing that. It's the communication. It's the extra workload that goes on to somebody else, and it's the anticipation that sometimes even brings about the stress. Yeah.
I think that too, a lot of it is when you get into it, the attitude that's there, it's so hard to break that. We talked about winter, the layers of ice that go on. And so, perhaps I don't, like this whole thing is, it's nice how it's organized and everything. I don't know that God actually has our marriages, compartmentalized into the 4 seasons, but you guys know what I'm talking about, of that layer of having that layer of coldness between the two of you. And then things start to begin to be just communicated about logistics as opposed to each other. And it can come with, coach spending a lot of time away, but then like breaking that. And like Jill said, the intentionality, if you start to think about the other person's intentions, and then it just seems like it's one thing, and I wish I knew exactly what it was each time, but one thing like chips away a little bit of that ice, and then all of a sudden, you're back to, where you want to be, I guess.
yeah, and so I think God is sitting back
And smiling when you said that, because I think marriage is a lot like the weather in Illinois, where you have 50 degrees one day, you got snow 2 days later. You know what I mean? It's just, there's not a specific like 3 or 4 month season to it. There are elements to every season in every phase of marriage. I think that's the other thing that you have to understand, is that these are real things that happen in the best of marriages. That's the thing that I think we often lose track and lose sight on, is that we think that we're the only ones going through this, or we think that maybe that nobody else has experienced the struggles or the challenges, and we look outside to the social media or to everybody in your community, and you're like, why aren't they doing this? And the reality is they are, we just don't see it, right? So that's, yeah.
You mentioned attitude.
attitude. So why don't we go to the attitudes? But I think
Yeah, attitudes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
One more flick.
one more?
There we go. So concern, uncertainty, and blaming. So I feel like we've kind of talked about blaming a little bit, right? Like, we didn't call it that, but you were
I mean,
kind
that's the first thing you do, right? You blame somebody for how you feel or how you respond to it. You're like, I'm this way because of, right? Go ahead.
Thinking like one of the things that Josh will do, like if I start showing some of those like emotions, be like, are you okay? Because you're not acting like yourself. And then that gives me that opening to be like, it's really not about you. This is what's going on.
right.
What you said before is, when the problems start to arise, I go into the mode, and I think a lot of us do, of making it personal, right? This is about, and we're not about solving the problem, we're about in attack mode.
Yeah.
And how do you reel yourself back from being in attack mode? And it's like I said, sure, Julia said, maybe we don't do that to each other. It's like, what are you doing? You're chipping away at our team, of our unity. And so it's to catch that is not always easy. So, so yeah, the making it personal in the midst of anger is, and one of those things we always hear, and as guys, I will speak for the guys, I know I struggle with it. When there's a problem, I'm always like, well, you do this, and right, that's the blaming, versus, okay, this is what I'm dealing with here. I'm hurt when you do that, I struggle with this, and so those two things, it's very difficult. I don't know if for men in general, but I know for me to frame it that way.
Yeah, and to share the emotion on really what the issue
Issue is, right? Because a lot of the time, it's not that we're angry, it's that we feel neglected, or we feel unheard, or we don't have the attention that we think we need. And that it's hard to admit that those are things that we actually need, and especially as men, right? You don't say that, I need that connection. I want to be paid attention to. I want to be heard. Those are things that we often don't express. And so oftentimes we let it boil over into the blame and the anger.
I think that too, like, before you were talking about when you early on in the marriage and she wanted a community, let's go out for dinner. No, I don't want to do that. I'm not a people person. Like, when we're all at our best, we put our spouse's needs and wants ahead of our own. But then the stressors that come in, all of a sudden is, I don't want, no, we're not going.
Right.
That type of thing. I think that's going to happen, but not allowing that to be the regular routine is huge.
Right.
We can relate about the children blowing up. Children just throw the giant wrenches in everything, but totally, like, one kid can change the mood of the whole household. And then I think, like, this study and just reading, Jill read a quote the other night about we are a team, yada, 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 like recognizing.
We are not enemies, we are a team.
Right, but just that idea, and you see funny memes, like, before people go on vacation with young kids, they like hug each other. It's like, we are a team. It's not us against each other, it's us against them. Funny. But you really do have to keep that in mind, because a lot of the time the kids can change that whole attitude, and it's hard to get back to where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think that's very important to remember your team. We even do that as a family. We used to call ourselves,
I don't remember, but
well, we're actually, doesn't matter. We have a team name for our family, but we always reminded them, we're like, we are a team. Like, you have to remember, we have to work together as a family, as a team. Anyway,
The state, just reflecting on a lot of this, something that I have to do myself is if he's got we all have pet peeves with each other and stuff, and I know what bothers him, so I'll try to avoid the pet peeves that he has and try to do things that I know that won't cause that. But I think that's helped us, because I'm a blow up person. So I have to learn to change myself for our sake. So that way I would tend to leave the room and not come back and stuff like that. So I have to learn how to handle that, because it's not on him. It's on me to come to terms with how I handle things. So I'm trying to figure out, I think I do a lot better job now than 25 years ago. So, but yeah, that's something I think you want to be willing to be a better person for your spouse.
And that's an very important thing.
do you want to talk about the hierarchy of, like, our calling?
well, yeah, I don't know if anyone else talked about this, but how when it comes to love, you love God, then you love your spouse, and then you love your children. And I think our society has really switched that up, right? It's all about the kids, all about the kids. And usually when that happens, you really notice that's when things get all blown up.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird to talk about that, because we're a little ways away from it, but we recognize that in a few short years, we're going to be empty nesters. So what's that look like? If we become all encompassed and consumed with our kids, what does that mean for us? And so that's an important thing to really understand, is that your foundation of your relationship to one another is rooted in your relationship to God. And that's the first thing you have to love. You can't love anything else unless you love that. and then you can love yourself and your spouse. That's the way it needs to be. And I know a lot of society would say that's backwards, but that's the way Christ has designed marriage to be and our relationship with him. So that's important.
I'll give you a foretaste of the feast to come. So where you think you might be as empty nesters when they leave.
Oh, they're not?
They do come back home. And then they will be for several years. You got a little bit more time.
I hope we do, but at the same time, I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so we go into the actions.
We've talked about this, right? But I think the thing that we haven't talked about a lot is the failure to face the issues. This is real. How many people like conflict? You like conflict? Not many people do. So what do we do? We kind of sweep it under the rug, right? And that's a normal thing. But having that understanding of facing these issues is an important aspect of your marriage because it really strengthens your ability to communicate. It strengthens your relationship. So it's important to identify and do this in the right way. Like Deb was saying, like you have to make it not just about you, it's about your spouse. You have to make sure you can face the issues and not blame. So.
Yeah, I think that's good.
On that point too, so one of the key things which is so difficult, and Julie and I had to learn this, was being quote unquote selfish for your marriage, to protect it. And then we had to be intentional in creating date nights again when the kids were young, and one of those things that we had lost in the midst of all the changes. Because I mean, fall, you're coming into fall, it can be a career change, it can be the pressures of starting a business, it can be you have your first, your second, your fifth child, whatever it is. And these major life changes throw all that uncertainty, and then everything goes on the back burner. And so failure to face those issues and have a plan and work through it, because it is hard work to be intentional to do these things. And it's like, well, I'm using all my energy at work, or I'm using all my energy on the kids. I don't have energy for this. Right?
Yeah, and so, again, go ahead. You were gonna
I
say
was just
something.
gonna say, so we were gonna get to that. Like, we intentionally have at least one date night every month, and we started doing that a while ago. But
Minimum once a month.
yeah, minimum. That's like we try a new place once a month is what we do. But but we like that made a big difference. Like for years, we weren't going on date nights. We didn't have time for date nights. Our kids were little. Timon, when he was little, had a lot of health, like food allergies, and couldn't really have sitters a lot. So we just didn't leave. Like we were at home all the time, or
And
had
that's
had him with us all the time.
And that was a time in which we probably experienced most of this,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And another transitional time you look at this is that when a child goes off to school, goes off to college, this is another time where it's like your emotions are different. Like you have this void that you don't know what to do with. And so this is why it's important to make sure your relationship and your connection is strong. Anybody else have complications with facing issues?
As far as failure to face issues, I feel like just one of the sneaky ways is if there's something that kind of makes me feel tight-chested inside, it irritated me, bothered me, and I feel maybe embarrassed, like why am I even upset about this? So I don't want to bring it up, and so I just stuff it down. And then you continually do that over and over and over again. And just like learning that you can bring it up and just say, hey, this might be stupid, but this kind of bothered me, and let's just talk about it. Because I get stuck.
You don't have to give us a specific example, because we all have them, but can you give us an example of something that?
Do you remember any? I know they're.
Oh, they're there, for sure.
And I know that they're silly, and I can't think of an example, but I know they're there all the time. You got one?
Okay, so we both work full time, and in the morning he would make his coffee and go, and then the girls were getting ready, making the lunches, doing all the things, and I said, I'm so sorry, but I am on the struggle bus in the morning. I need you to make the lunches. And he was like, kind of felt hurt that I said that because he felt like he wasn't like pulling his weight because he's working so hard all day. But I felt like I'm too. Like I just need a little.
Yeah. No, that's a good example.
And he got kind of hurt, and then I felt terrible for saying it because I thought it was silly. But then yeah.
But then I started making lunches.
That's important. Yeah, no, that's good. Anything else?
I think that just like the feeling of if one person, regardless of how much, like not that we keep score, but if one person feels as though they're doing more than the other person, even though you said going to work, it's not like, there can definitely be resentment there. And yeah, I mean, just figuring it out. I think talking about that without it being heated, like the lunch thing, we got that worked out too. Yeah.
I think women in particular probably feel that more.
Yeah.
With the
More
freedom, they're like, oh my gosh, can I just shower? Can I literally just shower without the kids bothering me? Or can I do this? Do I have to take the kids shopping with me? Can't you just be with the kids and or do this or that?
That used to be my quiet time. I would go grocery shopping at 10 o'clock at night when the kids were in bed, and I would just, anyone ever live in Iowa? Hy-Vee? I loved Hy-Vee. And it was my vacation.
Yeah. Somebody else had a hand up somewhere.
One observation is, and this is the difficult part, I know he says it earlier in the book, emotions are, right? They just happen. And the difficult part is when you have that emotion and your spouse doesn't have the same emotion, that's when fall starts to creep in because there's uncertainty. It's like, well, you don't feel this emotion the way I do when this change happens, whatever it is to trigger. And so it's really difficult to empathize and to start to understand your spouse's emotions because they are different, because we're all different in those triggers. That takes a long time.
Yeah, it does take a long time, but I think as we peel back
all the layers of all of this, the thing to understand is that your emotions are real, and I think we often as a society neglect true emotions. Like, we're like, oh, you don't have to be nervous. Don't be nervous. And the reality is, no, every one of us still gets nervous about certain things. Some of us still get fearful of certain things. We get anxious. We get scared. We have all of these emotions. Emotions are normal, but it's identifying and connecting and knowing each other enough to help each other through it and realizing that, I don't feel that same thing, so that's why I can help you in this situation, or I can be there for you in this situation. And I don't expect you to feel the same thing about this the way I do, right? It's important.
Yeah, and I think like you said, communication is key. When it comes down to it, that is the most important thing in a relationship. And I used to be, was really hard for me to be vulnerable and share. If something was bothering me, I'd roll it around in my head and, oh, it's stupid, it's stupid. But now I've set a rule for myself that if 24 hours goes by and I'm still thinking about it, I force myself to come to him. He's also really good about noticing and he'll lean in. But if he hasn't leaned in and said, hey, you're not acting yourself and it's still upsetting me, I do go to him and I will sound like a third grader when I bring it up. Like, because I'm not good at bringing things up. I'll just be like, okay, so I'm frustrated. And I'll even laugh. I'll be like, or I'll say it in a silly voice. Like, it is so hard for me, but we are both divorced. And so we've been through a broken marriage. And so I know that if I don't, it will go down that path again. And so I force myself. So I just want to encourage all of you that no matter how silly you're going to feel, just be like,
yeah, vulnerability is important.
Yeah. I'm at the, and it doesn't matter how it sounds, just get it out.
Yeah, being vulnerable is super important at that. And again, we shouldn't be afraid of what our
significant other thinks of us, right? Like, we're in this together. Like, we shouldn't be embarrassed about those things.
Add to that, I think, well, you weren't here, I don't think that a couple weeks ago, but one of the younger people said something about in the marriage in the beginning, they learned how to fight, they went to counseling, something like that, as a proactive measure. I loved that because
Taylor.
Okay.
Taylor,
I knew
before they both started
but
their.
I remember thinking how important and how different maybe that would have been for us to be like we were married. We've been married a long time too, but like how that would have changed things to learn how to fight fairly and to piggyback on what Angela was saying, it's very hard for men sometimes even to say, okay, we have an issue, let's go have a third party, because sometimes it's hard as just the two of you to work through some of those things, especially if it goes back to their childhood or your childhood. And it's, I think that too needs to be addressed within the church too. It's okay to have that piece as part of your marriage, Christian counselor or something like that. I think that's really important to recognize.
It is important. And I wanted
to speak a little bit on that with what Deb was saying too, is like your spouse and you differ on different things, right? You each have different triggers. You have different responses. And so, or do some of you in here have the same? Do you guys kind of have the same triggers or do you respond differently? How many people respond the same to frustration, neglect, whatever? everybody probably responds different. So understanding that and knowing, like I tell people all the time, it's like we know what we should and shouldn't do in certain situations. So it's in our best interest to really understand one another. And the deeper that connection, that marriage, that communication is, you start to understand them. And so being vulnerable to communicate and that foundation can start very early. So when you know what bothers somebody, you're more likely to avoid it. But like, how many of us are naive and you do things not knowing that it bothers somebody? And if your spouse doesn't say anything, you just keep doing it, and it just builds up, and then it becomes this massive issue that it doesn't have to be. So that's an important thing to understand.
Understanding that the root cause often has nothing to do
With you as a person, right? Yeah.
And it often has to do with something from childhood, like those early, all that kind of stuff.
I had one comment just about, David, you were mentioning that you feel like a tight feeling in your chest. Just even knowing what you feel or where you feel it when you're frustrated or when you're angry or whatever, that's the yoga teacher coming out in me. But just being able to know, like, when I'm angry, I feel it in my stomach or I feel it in my shoulders. Because that way, when you feel that feeling, you know, okay, I'm angry. What am I angry about? If you can identify that, then you can usually go talk to, your spouse about that. But if you don't even know, like, why am I feeling that in the pit of my stomach, then you can't even address it, right? So just being very aware of who you are and how you react to everything is important. We only have 8 minutes left, so should we get to one of the, you can go over that really quick. Yeah.
Sometimes he and I will, if something happened at work, and then we bring that home, he and I are both known for saying, hey, don't bring that home. Don't bring it on us and bring, so sometimes our arguments obviously don't stem from home. So we try to say, hey, we know it's from work.
Right.
Try to separate that a little bit, or at least talk it over.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking before we wrap up with this, there's one question here that talks about finding common interests. So I just wanted you to each take like 3 minutes to talk with your spouse, or if you don't have a spouse, you can talk to your friend next to you about something that's common to you. Maybe you don't want date nights. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you want to cook together or whatever. I don't know. But talk it out. Think of a way that you can connect once a month with your spouse, something that interests the two of you. Maybe you stay up and play a game. I don't know. Do a puzzle together. I don't know. So go ahead and take a couple minutes just to talk about that.
I gotta come over there.
So what's that mean, Don?
But then you get a
All right, 30 more seconds.
Thank
Okay, does anyone want to share what they came up with?
Remind me again exactly what the question was before we started, because we got
Go ahead. So, like, what are some intentional things that are common interests?
That you can do.
So uniquely, like, we like to do a lot of the same hobbies, so we kind of always have our kids with us, so we get our kids into those things that we both enjoy doing.
So I would say, I can speak for us, like, in our best seasons, we're
enjoying travel and exploration together. Like that's what we love to do. And so Dana has this like internal clock that like every 6 to 8 weeks she needs to go somewhere. She needs to do something. But we also love food. So we like date nights. That's why date nights have become a thing for us, and that's why we try new things, is so we can experience that kind of adventure and joy together.
And it could be here, or it could be in like Peru.
Right.
So we also love travel and food and date nights, but it's just not possible. Like we for the first time this October went on a trip, just the two of us. Well, not just the two of us, but without the kids, in a long time, for more than a night. It was awesome. But without being able to do that all that often, and even date nights, we try to do a once a month thing, like similar. But now at home, we've started Thursday mornings. We get up and we work out together. Like we both work out every day, but we do it together on Thursday mornings. And then a little bit of me hates it because it's awful, like sweating nuts. But I
Not lying.
correct. But it's been really good. And I think like part of that too is just when you do work out and get a good workout in, it's very good for you in general. And like we see it improving, your attitude and etc.
So I think that's an important one that a lot of people overlook. And the thing about working out together that's interesting is it shows your vulnerability together. It shows that you're working hard together. It shows and it embodies everything that a marriage truly needs. So I think that's important.
It's been good.
I would also say we typically tend to, like when we're maybe a little frustrated or annoyed with each other on like a Saturday morning, or the kids are just like, I'm like, I am gonna lose it, and it's 7:30 in the morning, like, we're going on a family run. And we do, and then you're spending time together.
Kids ride their bikes, but
some exercise, and you come back feeling much better.
Yes. We used to have dance parties.
And I know Dan.
He doesn't dance, he watched. But.
Anybody else?
So that's the connecting to one another, and then we add connecting to God. There were some great verses. So I think I put the verses, that's actually the quote that we read earlier. But we put some verses in here in the margins. Just always remembering to stay in the Word. So like what Nicole was saying, we'll send verses to each other also. And I don't know if do any of you have the app, like the YouVersion app? Like a Bible on your phone. It's great because it has a verse of the day and it has a little image that goes with it. So you can always just at least read that, and you can, if it's a good one, you can send it to your spouse or to your kids. This one, I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. So just remembering that when you remember to turn to God when you're having problems, first, turn to him in prayer, turn to him in the Word, that always makes a difference.
And that also will go to maybe allowing yourself to say something that might be on your heart or on your mind, and asking for that wisdom and how to do it, right? And so stepping back, instead of doing it in the time of the emotion, stepping back and praying about it first, that might soften it a little bit, or maybe it might help soften your heart to say, wait a minute, that was not really a big deal. I should have let that go. I am going to talk about it, but like I need to be communicating in how I do that. Don, did you want to?
Things to do, but it's one of the most important things to do is figure out how you as a couple are going to connect spiritually. And it's very difficult. I mean, Julie and I have been married a long time, and I've been a Christian for 31 years. And I pray publicly a lot easier than I pray with Julie alone together. So, and it ebbs and it flows and all that. And whether it's a devotion together, as you just said, that's what kind of made me think of this. Dana, and you do that, or a Bible study together, or listen to a Christian podcast or something, or praying together. Whatever you find that works for you, having that on a regular basis is vital for being the two of you rooted in God.
Oh, that was different. That was,
So
yeah,
true.
that was, yeah. I don't even remember what all we put on there. Fall will happen and can.
Yeah, like we said, like this is a normal thing. It's going to happen. And if we recognize it and use some of these things to strengthen our communication and strengthen our understanding of where we are, it will blossom into something really, really powerful. It's not about the changing of times, but it's also like, how are we going to respond to those? It's all about, yeah.
we pretty much covered all of us, but yeah.
That's it. And we are done. Time is up. So, Dana, would you like to pray?
Yeah, I'll pray, and then if you have any questions or just want to chat with us, we'll be in here. Lord, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for these couples and for even the spouses who cannot be here with us today. I just thank you for connecting us with the person that that along with you completes us. Help us to remember that it is a cord of three, to always keep you first and then always care for our spouse and then our children. And just thank you for our time together today. And I just pray, Lord, that you will help us to carry this through our marriages. And all God's children said, amen. Yeah, thank you.